So my name is Andrea Tales, and I have a particular interest in sensory function and attention in people living with dementia and with cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment. Now, I'm sure that everybody knows the relationship, the very important relationship between memory and many types of dementia. But I think what people don't always know is the relationship between attention and sensory function and people living with dementia. Attention is really, really important, and hopefully you're attending to me now. And I can tell that because some of you are looking at me, and where you're looking tends to be where your attention is. And attention is really important because it helps you interact with your environment, it helps you see, to concentrate and to listen to things. And it's therefore very important for social interaction. And for many, many years, sensory function and attention was really ignored when we were looking at what is it like to live with dementia and cognitive change. And I'm just going to spend a few moments showing some of the functions that change if we're living with dementia and cognitive impairment in relation to attention and sensory function. What I've got on this slide here just shows some of the multitude of techniques that we use to measure vision and oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Is that better? Thank you. So of course, now, you know, now my voice is clearer. You don't have to attend so hard. So that's quite a good example, isn't it? I fully planned, of course. What we're showing on this slide is the fact that it's really good to talk to people about what their attention is doing, how they see the world, how they hear the world. But sometimes in order to make a change, we have to be quite assertive. And that's where researchers can come in, because we can say, we've got really strong evidence to back up what people are saying in your clinic, what people living with dementia are experiencing and saying. And that's what we're doing. We're working together to provide evidence to back up and to drive change. So dementia and the environment, lots of areas of interest for lots of my colleagues and I. I've mentioned attention and how important that is. If your attention goes, it's really difficult to concentrate. You wouldn't be able to listen to me. You might not be able to read a book very well. And there's also something called information processing speed, how fast your brain works. And we know that for some people living with attention, that speed of processing, if you like, of being able to understand information and process it and act upon it is slowed down. And that might mean that people are much slower at interacting. And I'm saying all this because I think if we are aware, as members of the public, clinicians, researchers, that sometimes people living with dementia have these issues as well, not just memory, we get a far better understanding of what people are experiencing and what we collectively and the people themselves might need to do to make living with dementia better. I've mentioned sensory function, and other people will be talking about that. Claire, Hamley and Emma will be talking about different aspects of sensory function, because it's not all just about vision. What's important as well is that we look at the person, we look at individual differences, and in my area, it's called precision medicine. You look at people, you don't assume a one size fits all. You look at a person and you get a profile, for example. You might get a profile of somebody's sensory function, as well as their attention, as well as all the tests they get in their memory clinic, because only then can you really get a good idea of what a person is experiencing. And because of that, not only do we do all the science, but we do qualitative research as well in parallel, because that's so important. You can't have one without the other. We know, and I'll show a slide later, that there are lots of different etiologies or different types of dementia. And that's really important because, again, different types of dementia are related to different problems with attention, different problems with sensory function, and we need to be aware of that. We also need to be aware that sometimes comorbidities, so people living with dementia might also be living with a different disease or a condition, and that might affect attention and cognitive function as well. And we need to be aware of that. We must not forget either people living with subjective and mild cognitive impairment. For some people, that is the early stages of dementia. For others, it isn't. But either way, it's really difficult to live with cognitive changes sometimes, and really difficult to interact with one's environment and to interact socially. In actual fact, if attention and your sensory function and your cognition isn't working properly, you're less likely to go out and be involved in social interaction. I'm also really interested in methodology, and that's, we mustn't assume that what we use to measure brain function, for example, which is what I do primarily, is the same in older people as it is for younger people. Again, it's about individual differences. So really, I'm talking about beyond memory. We examine a wide range of functions in dementia together with how they are experienced. And this improves knowledge. We get to know the physiological basis for why some people living with dementia and cognitive impairment might experience difficulties in certain environments when they're out and about. It also helps us to characterize dementia. And what we found is that research tests might be more sensitive to a wider range of brain changes than the tests you get clinically. And in fact, there's a bit of a dichotomy in that clinical practice is often quite a long way behind what research evidence is showing us. What we do when we measure extra functions like sensory function and attention is a better understanding of an individual's independence, what they can still do, not necessarily what care needs they have and what they perhaps can't do as well. And it's really relevant for falls. We know that people living with any type of cognitive impairment, and especially dementia, have a significantly increased risk of falling. And actually, attention and sensory function are really important risk factors for that. If your attention isn't working as well, you're more likely to fall. And if your sensory processing isn't working as well, you're more likely to fall. Just to say, when I talk about sensory function, I'm not just saying the functions that you go and have tested when you go to your optician or your audiologist. I'm talking about the processing of our sensory environment within our brain at much higher levels of processing. You're not aware of this, but actually you might go to an audiologist or an ophthalmologist and your vision and hearing are fine, but the pathways that then your brain uses to process that information for perception and for you to interact and behave aren't working. So I'm just wanting to show how important research is, because it shows up areas of dysfunction and function that we might not be aware of when we're trying to assess what it's like living with a certain type of dementia. And it helps our understanding of loneliness, because as I said earlier, people, if they can't attend properly and sensory function isn't working, might not go out as much as they would like. This is just a slide showing the various different types or etiologies of dementia. And I just wanted to emphasize that not all dementias are related to the same kind of cognitive change or brain function changes. So it's really important when we are assessing somebody's care needs and what they can and cannot do, what type of dementia they have. For example, vascular cognitive impairment is highly related to problems with attention and problems with the speed of processing. And quite often, unlike Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia presents with attentional problems or a slowing of being able to process information. And sorry, my attention was captured there because my slide has changed. So it's changed to what I was expecting. Another example done on purpose. But we know, there's a list here. Our research so far shows us that when I say we, some people who are living with dementia and cognitive impairment have changes in their ability to control your attention. Perhaps you're choosing or not choosing to listen to me, you're choosing where you put your attention. Attentional disengagement, when you stop looking at one thing, look at something else. Orientation, visual search, how you select what you want to attend to. Really importantly, the inhibition of irrelevant information. You can probably hear doors slamming and all sorts of different noises, but you might be able to think, right, I'm going to focus on Andrea, I can ignore that. Some people who are living with dementia can't ignore that, and they get very easily distracted by irrelevant information, which then affects behaviour. And I'm not sure whether, I don't think you can see this, but there was a picture of my dog Millie there, and it had a beautiful picture of Millie's eyes. And I was using this slide to show you that that's what it looks like when you're paying attention, because my dog's eyes were completely looking at me because I had a treat in my hand. So sorry, that's just not coming through. We also know that some people living with dementia, especially people living with Alzheimer's disease, have some difficulty in moving their eyes, in the pupil's response to bright light, again, which can be quite disorienting and can stop you interacting well with your environment. Also, contrast sensitivity, that means how different an object has to be, for example, from its background, for you to tell it's a different object. Shadow processing can be really difficult for some people. Many people without dementia, a shadow is definitely a shadow. You know it's a shadow. For some people living with dementia, that shadow is perceived or interpreted as a whole, as a depth, and people might step over that shadow, thus increasing the risk of falls. So just to reiterate, we show a biological and physiological basis for some of these changes, and we know from qualitative research and scientific research that the two match up. What people report is things that are really happening within their brain. And what I also wanted to say is that in terms of attention, how many of you could describe really what attention is? How many of you have thought, I wonder if my attention's working okay? You probably do that with memory, and in everyday life, you'll think, oh, I can't remember that. And if you are concerned about your memory, you'll go to your GP. But what tends to happen at the moment is that people can have really significant changes in their attention and in some aspects of their visual processing, but they wouldn't go to their GPs to talk about it, because how do you talk about it? What does it mean? How do you describe it? When we've spoken to people, we realise that you tend to get a sense of something's not quite right. So we're doing a public campaign soon to try and increase the understanding of attention and encouraging people and clinicians and others to talk more about it so we get a better understanding of it. Just very quickly, I'm interested in the use of wearables to see how we interact with our environment. Again, it's really good to self-manage if you're living with cognitive impairment or the early stages of dementia. You can monitor some aspects of your health and well-being. And again, I'm not going to talk about it now, but if anybody wants to talk to me about wearables and technology, please do so afterwards.